Hi, everyone, and welcome to the PieCast for Tuesday, November 3rd. And I'm Eben Pilch, Tom's Hardware Editor-in-Chief. I'm joined, as always, by Ash Puckett, our Raspberry Pi expert. And we have the most special of special guests, Raspberry Pi founder and CEO Eben Upton, with us again today. Hi, Eben. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely fantastic to be here. It's a fun week for us. We're having a really good time. So it's good to be here in the middle of a really fun week.
Yeah, this is there's a lot going on with Pi right now, and of course, the big news from yesterday is this Raspberry Pi 400. So I want to just say to all those who are watching us live, we'll be taking your questions in the chat room. So please fire away. I'll start with a question. What motivated you to create the Raspberry Pi 400?
That's an interesting one. Because it's been a long time, right? I mean, you have to think back a little bit. This is a product that's been in gestation for probably, Raspberry Pi has been going for about 8 years. We've been running for about 10 years, been selling products for about 8 years. This is a product that's kind of 4 years in the gestation. The keyboard, I think we met our keyboard vendor at CES at the start of 2017. So I mean, thinking back, you think about what Raspberry Pi's motivation is. We're a not-for-profit. What are we trying to do? We're trying to get young people excited about computers. And there's always been a very conscious harking back to the 1980s. Because, of course, the 1980s was an era, for better or worse. I mean, there are a lot of problems with the 1980s as a model for how we do computer stuff, how we get young people interested in computers. Notably, all of the demographic problems that we have in the computer industry kind of derive from the demographic problems or the demographic biases of the 1980s. Lots of boys. Lots of middle-class boys like me. But, there were a lot of ways in which it was a great time. And one of the ways in which it was a great time was young people had access to programmable hardware. And I had a machine called a BBC Micro, and then I had a machine called a Commodore Amiga. And they had that form factor, right? So they had the form factor of a keyboard with a motherboard inside it that had some logic on it that implemented at the time, fairly low-end microcomputer. So there's always been kind of an awareness, if you think of Raspberry Pi as an organization which tries to get young people interested in computers by copying some of the attributes of the last time young people were interested in computers. There's kind of an awareness that form factor was quite a powerful thing. But of course, when we started Raspberry Pi, we hadn't got a hope in hell of building something like that. It's a very complicated object. And so we built what we could, which was a single board computer that you plugged peripherals into. And of course, it had a lot of advantages, notably a cost advantage, which is if you could scrounge up you could get secondhand versions of all of the peripherals you need to put around the device, and then the only new thing you had to buy was the object. And that motivated things like using a mobile phone charger as a power supply. But as we've grown a bunch of capabilities in the organization, what has happened to Ash? I don't know what's happened. As we've grown a bunch of capabilities in the organization, we've been able to get a little bit closer. There are upsides and downsides to the approach and to the original Raspberry Pi approach of building a single board computer. One of the upsides, one is cost. Another one is embeddability. So the product that we designed as a computer ends up getting used as an embedded system. And so those were very, very powerful advantages. Downsides, there is an approachability barrier around the Raspberry Pi, the classic Raspberry Pi form factor, which is always going to limit it to people who are not necessarily technical, but at least a little bit adventurous. and that would kind of limit our ability to get out to large numbers of people. And so there was this idea of, well, if we make the thing a little more approachable, we make it a consumer product. We try to keep all of the best aspects of Raspberry Pi, the software, the collateral, the community, the idea of bundling it with Python and C compilers and so forth. But we put it having GPIO pins, but we put it into a slightly more user-friendly form factor. Can we reach a broader demographic of people? That's really where the idea came from. And it came many years ago. It came sort of in 2016. And it's taken us this long to do the engineering. Simon Martin, who did the heavy lifting on this, has been doing it pretty much since then. And it also took time to get a chipset that we were happy with. So I don't think we had a prototype of this based on the Pi 3 Plus chipset. But I think particularly because of the limited amount of memory on that platform, it wouldn't really have been compelling as a general purpose computer. And so we sort of felt it was such a nice idea that we needed to wait until we had the right iteration of the core Raspberry Pi hardware to build the product on.
So I think a lot of folks want to know why it's called the Raspberry Pi 400.
Yeah, and again, back to the 1980s, awful lot of machines with names like that, right? I had an Amiga 600. I had there's Amiga 500, obviously, Atari ST 520, Atari 400. There were a lot of people actually have asked us, is this explicitly an Atari 400 reference? Atari 400 series wasn't really that successful in the UK, so this is not an Atari 400 reference, but it is a reference to that kind of broad naming convention. It's nice for us because it gives us a way of generating the names of Raspberry Pi 400-like products from the names of the base products they're derived from. So in the far future, when we do Raspberry Pi 5, if we do a derivative of it, it will likely be called the Raspberry Pi 500. So that's quite nice. And there's this idea that if you are new to the Raspberry Pi world and you want to know what product to buy, buying the largest number is always the right algorithm. And the nice thing about this is because these are the product, in addition to being kind of useful for technically illiterate people who want to have a PC, this is also an ideal beginner's product. And so it's quite nice that we can just say 400 beats 4 for a beginner.
You're quiet.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I had some technical difficulties.
Speaking of how it beats 400 beats 4, I think one of the things that a lot of people noticed, including us, is that you can overclock the Raspberry Pi 400 a little bit higher than a regular Raspberry Pi 4. How did that happen, and why did it happen?
It's mostly thermals. It's mostly that big chunk of aluminium in the design. There's a little bit more. I mean, there's a bit of tweaking has happened elsewhere in the design, but it's mostly just about being able to get rid of the heat. It's also the case that it's only recently that we eliminated our last. You're aware that there was a can't run faster than 2.14, the rather suspicious-looking 2.147 gigahertz, which of course is 2 to the 32 minus 1, 2 to the 1 minus 1. It took us a little while to remove all of the signed 32-bit integer issues because of course we started off with a 700 megahertz processor, so there was never any. It's another one of these ones where, like when Psy got more than 2 billion views for Gangnam Style and it broke YouTube, or YouTube had to fix their integer implementation. A similar thing happened to us, right? So it's only recently we fixed that. Part 4 itself is pretty overclockable, but of course you have to be able to get rid of the heat.
So does this mean that if you buy a new Raspberry Pi 4 that's been recently manufactured, you could also go past 2.147?
I think there's nothing intrinsic to. There is a different stepping of the silicon on there, but there's nothing intrinsic to. The main thing that silicon brings is it fixes an issue with the sock. We have a special guest. Hello, special guest.
When we go to nursery, we'll be all dirty, so we have to clean up. That's why I have something where saying I have a delivery.
Could go on for a little while. Yeah, I mean, the main thing that C0 brings actually has nothing to do with speed. It's that there is an issue with the P0 stepping where the eMMC controller can only access the first gigabyte of physical memory, and the PCI Express controller can only access the first 3 gigabytes of memory, which is the weirdest issue in the world. This one, C0 stepping, the eMMC can access the first 4 gig, and the PCI Express can access the first 8 gig. So that's the main difference between P0 and C0. Yeah.
So how do you get? Is this the only way to get a C0 stepping, or if you buy a Raspberry Pi 4 of a certain age,
compute
you'll get
module?
it?
Compute module has C0 on. So effectively, what we've done, we've kept P0 for existing products because we're quite keen on stability. Raspberry Pi gets used in an enormous number of industrial products, and so we are very obsessive about stability and about the engineering change process. But new products, obviously, given a choice, would you like to have the bug fixed silicon or the non-bug fixed silicon? Obviously, new products we introduced C0.
Yeah.
I have a question, if I could. Just kind of a general question about the Raspberry Pi 400. Do you think it might be a recurring product in the Raspberry Pi line, or is this something that might just be a one-off product?
It'll be a recurring product if it's successful. We sold a lot of Raspberry Pi 400s yesterday. We made 55,000 of them, and there were not very many left in stock at the end of the day yesterday. So I think we're saying to people, we're going to build about 200,000 units. See how we get on. I think it's getting to the point where we're encouraging people to, as of, 36 hours in, I think we're getting to the point where we're encouraging people to pre-order. If you want to make sure that you get your Pi 400. So we'll see. Most of our approved resellers accept pre-orders. So we are, if it's successful, then it will become a recurring feature, just like the compute module has. So the compute module 1 was an experimental product in the sense that we didn't know if it was going to be a feature, if it was going to be a feature of the product lineup, and it was successful. That led to CM3 plus CM4, and so this is probably the start, hopefully the start of a third form factor SKU of Raspberry Pi.
So we have another question, which is, now that you've the built-in keyboard, when will you be releasing the Raspberry Pi laptop?
I don't know. There's a couple of things probably between us and a Raspberry Pi 4, a Raspberry Pi laptop. One is capabilities. So we don't know anything about batteries at the moment. We don't know the mechanical engineering. There are mechanical engineering challenges. We don't know anything about screens. Well, we do. We make a little screen, but big screens. We don't know anything about batteries. We don't know anything about touchpads. We don't know anything about the mechanicals of laptops are really complicated, actually. Doing a good laptop, doing a bad laptop's really easy. Doing a laptop which is of the quality that we would want to be able to do would be hard, and we don't have those capabilities at the moment. So I wouldn't say never, but so another problem is that all those things that you have to put into a laptop kind of it's very hard to make a laptop which is compelling from a cost perspective in the same way that a Raspberry Pi is compelling from a cost perspective, because you have a bunch of fixed costs. You've got to put a battery in there. You've got to put a decent screen. You've got to put a keyboard. It'd be hard for us because we wouldn't put a bad screen in. We don't really put bad stuff in Raspberry Pis, and so you'd end up putting a good screen in, and then you kind of in a position where you're maybe more thinking like you're in kind of Chromebook land, really. You're in kind of Chromebook territory. And so it might be hard to build a compelling differentiated product. I will never say never, but we are some capabilities away from even being able to consider it. And even if we had the capabilities, it's not obvious that it would be the right thing for us to do.
Yeah, I would just take a second to point out to our audience that there are third-party Raspberry Pi laptops. Yeah. Not that they are great. Not that we can really vouch for them being fantastic laptop quality. There is the Pi Top, which I think is old, and I don't think they've updated for Pi 4 yet. And I have over on my shelf over here, which I think I've shown before, the ElePro Pro Pi 2. The Pro Pi 2 is not a good laptop as a productivity device, but it's a nice learning device because it has all these GPIO motors and sensors buried under the keyboard. So,
and that's another place that you might go to be differentiated. We want to be differentiated, right? And Pi 400 is differentiated because there's nothing like it. It's another category defining product. And I wonder whether we'll see other computers like Pi 400. Obviously, once we started doing Pi, we started seeing things that are like Pi's. Maybe if 400 is successful, maybe we'll see things like that. So, but another place we can go for differentiation, as you say, as CrowPi does, is with the mix of other stuff you put in the platform. So you make a ruggedized laptop or a laptop for hacking with for experimentation like CrowPi. So that might be a thing.
I saw one question pop up earlier. Somebody wanted to know about the possible integration of a touchpad on the Raspberry Pi 400.
We thought about it, right? Because there's an obvious. I actually really, if this wasn't a thing that everyone hates, then I would have I used to work for IBM, so I would have put a track point on. Yeah,
that's what I want.
Track point, right? And I know buttons along the bottom edge, and literally everybody hates the track point. It's just like
not everybody.
It's the whipping boy. Yeah, it's the whipping boy of pointing devices, though. You have to train yourself, and then you have to build up your strength so you don't get too much RSI in your index finger. And it's so, but it would have fitted beautifully into the form factor, right? Because it would have just been there, and it would have been wonderful. But nobody, I have to not indulge myself. So anyway, that would have been fun. We did think about the touchpad probably on the right hand side of the keyboard. Obviously, there are left versus right handed people. Things there. There's some accessibility. Yeah, like this. There we are. So we did think about that. We didn't go for it in the end because we thought that you can get external touchpads if that's what you want. And a calculation with Raspberry Pi products is always about trying to make things which serve the broadest fraction of our audience. And that one probably didn't make the cut in the same way that on the base product, real-time clocks have never made the cut.
I'm just going to say, I think if you put a pointing stick on it, it would be a great opportunity to educate the public about the value of the pointing stick. Something I try to do in my personal life every day. Not everyone listens to me.
Every day.
I think we should. It's also like putting you should have just put in the hotels. You should have it in the bedside drawer, a little panel about why that is the one true way to control the pointer on the screen.
Yeah, exactly.
Even Lenovo, even ThinkPad kind of lost there. They ended up with both, didn't they? They ended up with kind of these ones where you had a touchpad and then you had two lots of mouse buttons, one under the keyboard for people who wanted to use the track point and one on the bottom edge.
We talk with them on a regular basis. And every time I bring a young staffer with me to meet Lenovo, they always ask when they're going to get rid of the track point. And the people at Lenovo say that would be blasphemy. And I turn to them and I say, that would be blasphemy. So
we need to get out to Cupertino and explain to them that this is the feature for next year's line of MacBook Airs.
Yes, that would solve so many problems. So we have some questions about I think we have some questions about Windows. Would it be possible to cooperate with people to get drivers functioning correctly on Windows?
I think the big challenge is because you can run Windows. There's enough UEFI work being done that you can run Windows on Raspberry Pi 4. It doesn't have hardware accelerated video multimedia is the main gap. DX drivers are really hard to write. Only a very small number of people know. The universe of people who know enough about DirectX and know enough about graphics hardware is very, very, very small. We've looked at this a lot over the years, and we've had a relationship with Microsoft, which has waxed and waned, I guess, over the years. And a perennial point of difficulty is finding somebody who will write the DX driver for this product. And without graphics acceleration and media acceleration, it will always be a second class. Windows on a Raspberry Pi would always be a second class citizen. And we've never got an answer to it. We've never got a solution yet. There are only really 3 GPU lines that are supported by Windows. So GeForce, Radeon, and Adreno, which is the Qualcomm 3D hardware that's in the Snapdragon laptops they do. So there are only ever 3, right? It's a much narrower world than the Kronos world, than the OpenGL Vulkan world. And so it's hard to do. I'd love to do it because I actually think, it's much less relevant than it used to be. When we started Raspberry Pi, we've always said we're a PC company. And it was always, the lack of Windows was always a little bit of a bump in the road. I mean, obviously we needed more performance as well, where we kind of largely got over that bump now. But it wasn't in 2012, if you didn't run Windows, it was very hard to say you were a PC. Now pretty much a PC is a thing that runs a web browser. Yes, what do people do? They start Windows up and they start Chrome up on it, and that's it. And they use Google Docs, right? So only a small fraction of people use kind of Windows native applications on Windows, unless they're gamers. And so it's become less relevant, but I think that it still would be a lovely thing to have. And it's still something, if Microsoft want to help us, I think we'd be very open to, and we would throw a lot of resource and a lot of money at it. But we've never really got there.
I mean, one thing I really like is that it's given me and my son a really great education in Linux. We've become really facile with Linux because of using Raspberry Pi OS. And then when we're using Windows, we're often like, why isn't it so easy? Why can't we just run a package update?
It's the packaging. The packaging system is the thing, right? That's the killer Linux feature that I just, you're in any other platform, either of the other 2 platforms, you're like, why am I downloading a DIMG file and dragging a thing onto my applications window or something? Why am I not just taking apt update, apt install blah? Why is installing the GIMP on my MacBook such a pain in the neck when it's just apt install GIMP? Thanks. Yes.
So I think it's been a great, because you can't do the lazy thing and run Windows. You got to actually learn about Linux if you're not already a Linux person. It's really a great education, really great education in Linux, which is obviously a much more advanced operating system. So, and
it's something, it's a little bit like, for me, Linux was a little bit like Python or source control. Where it's kind of one of those things you got to get, where it's one of those things that's a bit of a pain in the neck for a short period of time and then unlocks this vast ocean of productivity. And one thing I think we try and do with Raspberry Pi is we try to kind of package Linux nicely. Like Ubuntu do this, obviously, as well, very well. Try to package Linux in a way which reduces the size of that first step, but retains all of the benefit after your first hour.
Yeah, I think Raspberry Pi OS does a fantastic job with that. We were recently tasked with testing out NVIDIA's new Jetson Nano board, which uses a form of Ubuntu that they call eLinux. And just some of the things that are really easy to do out of the box in Raspberry Pi OS are incredibly complicated, like setting up VNC, for example. There's no equivalent to Raspberry config that you can use to just set up VNC and SSH.
And there's just no substitute for years in the market. We've had Simon Long, an old friend of mine from Broadcom who joined us in 2014. He's basically spent 6 years now polishing, just sanding the edges off the user experience. And it's an ongoing process. It continues. But that amount of time in the market, both because it gives you engineer time to work on it, and it also gives you time to get feedback from people. And we're not slavish in our attention to feedback, but we do take feedback very seriously.
So we have a question about this. This sounds very ambitious to me, but will there be any mini ATX sized I/O boards for Compute Module 4 so you can put it in a normal PC case?
I think that would be a lovely project. I am not aware of anyone doing it, but it would be lovely, right? Because there is a whole world of there's a whole ecosystem And back to the point about existing objects, about trying to get value out of reuse. Reuse is better than recycle. No, nothing's as cheap as the thing you already own. So that would be lovely, actually. I'm not aware of anyone doing it, but the compute module's been in the market 2 weeks. Compute module 4's been in the market 2 weeks, and I think it would be nice because, as much as anything else, I think I kind of glance a little bit at that big slab of metal, the chassis of a mini ITX case would be a lovely way to get rid of extra heat, right? In the same way that the big plate in Pi 400 does.
Yeah. One thing that I don't know if you're familiar with Jeff Geerling, who's done a lot of work with the compute module. So he's trying. Are you aware he's trying to get a graphics card to work with the Raspberry Pi compute module?
Yeah. Yes, and people have done this in the context of the desoldered Pi 4 as well. So people desolder the VLI chip and solder. People have been able to get PCI Express running fairly stably-ish on a butchered Pi 4. But you can do it properly now because, of course, the compute module I/O board has the X1 PCI Express socket on it. I think people are running into some trouble with, and Jeff certainly has, with the PCI Express controller. There are some legacy features of PCI Express controllers that graphics cards tend to rely on. And so when you try to allocate PCI bar resource at startup time, you can't always get everything you want. And I think a lot of it's going to boil down to whether the bits that you can't allocate are actually important. There was some suggestion that some of the things it's trying to allocate are kind of legacy. They're only there for legacy reasons, and that you might be able to do without them. It's challenging, of course, because the drivers, even the ARM drivers, are closed. Tend to be closed source, and so there's a question of with the NVIDIA cards he's using, do you use the NVIDIA drivers which are closed but very mature, or do you use the Nouveau drivers which are open but less mature? So usually what's going on inside them and trying to figure out why they're falling over. So yeah, and then he's tried some AMD. He's tried an AMD card as well. I don't know. I don't have a good feel for whether the bits that we don't have are going to turn out to be important or not.
Yeah, I certainly applaud the effort.
Yeah, I want to see Quake 3. I want to see, obviously we run Quake 3 very well, but I'd like to see Quake 3 running on a graphics card. 4K Quake 3 running on a graphics card attached to a compute module would be great.
Yeah, that's the goal. So someone asks, and I know there's a workaround for this, about making YouTube run better. Is there a plan to make YouTube run better at 1080p on Raspberry Pi OS?
So it depends what people mean by better, I suppose. There is YouTube playback for kids has been a deal breaker for my boys. Is this a person who is online at the moment? Because they could perhaps tell me which aspect of it they found to be a deal breaker.
I can say that one thing that we found, that a lot of folks have found and I found, is that I think it's because of Widevine support. Not only is YouTube a little bit sluggish at certain resolution at like 1080p, but obviously you can't even do Netflix or Amazon Prime. But there's a workaround which I actually have. We have a how-to on Tom's Hardware on how to do.
Yes, Chromium Media. This is the thing called Chromium Media Edition.
Right.
So that's an interesting script. It does two things. Took it apart and had a look at it. It does two things. One, it extracts so to play Widevine, it extracts a Widevine support library from a Chrome OS image. And this is amusing for lots of reasons, because it's DRM, but the file it extracts is a thing which basically breaks the DRM, right? So it's not very good DRM. It's basically a file, a shared object file that you put encrypted bitstream into, and it gives you unencrypted pictures.
Yep.
I would be very happy if I was a content vendor. If the DRM that I'd been sold did that, I would be kind of sad, right? Was so trivially broken, and if every Chromebook on the planet ships with a library that breaks it. So it goes and gets one of those libraries and makes that available to Chromium. And the other thing it does is it disables the compositing window manager. So it disables Xcomp Manager, which is what we used to do on our desktop. This is based on an idea, I think, and I think there is some merit to this, the limiting factor in decoding video and getting onto the screen in Chromium on a Raspberry Pi is not decoding the video. And it's not even actually getting it into the web browser window. It's getting the web browser window composited back into the desktop. And so if you run the desktop without a compositing window manager, then those pixels are just going straight onto the screen. So there's less being done to the pixels on their way from the video codec to the screen, and therefore the Pi can run faster and it can keep up. We're having a look at it. I don't actually like. There's a reason why there are lots of reasons why everyone runs compositing window managers now. So my preference would be to make compositing window managers run faster. And we have an engineering program going on with a contractor at the moment, trying to look at doing that. In the meantime, the hack you mentioned is quite a good hack. It costs you in some other places, but if what you really care about is playing video in YouTube, then it's probably the right thing to do. And your tutorial is the one I point everyone to when they ask about either question, the how do I make YouTube run faster, or how do I play Netflix?
Yep. So this is a question I know we get all the time, and I don't know if you have a new answer for it, but that's actually not the question. The question is, the Raspberry Pi Zero is rather old at the current time. Will there be a sequel?
We'd love to do a sequel. I think we've talked quite a lot about what the challenges are. The big challenge is that none of the subsequent chips that we've used, so 2836, 2837, or 2711, they all have external DRAM. So they don't support POP DRAM. If you look at it, I think it's actually the background that you have, the background you have for the PiCast is a close-up on the 2835. You can see there are two layers of chips. There's the Vulkan chip, and there's the memory on top. None of the other devices support that, and that's the key to making Zero the size it is. That's the key to making Zero very dense. So yes, we'll do an upgraded Zero when we figure out how to solve that problem.
I have a question.
Probably just another chip. Sorry, it's a new chip. That's it. Sorry, Ash.
No, I'm just excited. On the subject of future potential smaller boards, while I've got you, is there anything you could tell us about the possibility of a Raspberry Pi 4 Model A?
So A boards are funny things, right? And A boards happen because the A board was the original idea, right? Because we said a $25 computer, that's the Raspberry Pi, and our launch product was a $35 computer. So the difference is that what we described as an A board, and people said to us, yeah, we need more memory than that. We need an Ethernet port, and so we did the B first because that's what people were asking for. A boards are never super popular, so an A board might sell. We might sell 200, 300,000 A boards in a year, and we would sell out of a total of 7 or 8 million Raspberry Pis. They're never super popular, but they do enable a bunch of interesting use cases of the Pi that the bigger device won't do. We've always felt that we have to be able to articulate a price differentiation between them. That suppose you made it $35. You said, well, what you're buying with an A is, and I think this is what people are buying with A. People are buying a form factor. You could reasonably say, we're going to charge you the same for an A as a B, and you get different form factors, so you can do different stuff with it. We've never really wanted to do that. We've always wanted the A to be cheaper. The maximum price, which I think is meaningfully cheaper than 35, is 25. And it's actually quite hard to imagine a $25 derivative of how you'd cut down the B model to get yourself a cost structure that let you sell at $25. You could cut down to 1 gig. I mean, obviously we've boosted the 35 to 2 gig. Cut down to 1 gig, that saves you a little bit. You would lose the USB controller, that saves you a little bit. PCB is a bit smaller, so that saves you something. You could cheap out the radio, but we didn't cheap out the radio for 3A plus. And it would feel a bit awkward. So we could go to the single band radio. We could go to the 2.4 gig, the 43438 silicon, and that would save a little bit. So there's a bunch of stuff you could do, but it doesn't necessarily add up to $10 of cost saving. For me, the nice thing about it would be that you would have exposed PCI Express. So you could bring your PCI Express to some sort of connector, probably not M2 because there are challenges with M2, but you could bring it to some sort of connector on the board, and that would be fun. And I'm sure people would do cool stuff with that. So it's kind of floating out there on the list. I remember we didn't do a 2A or a 3A. We did a 1A plus and a 3A plus, and we don't always do an A derivative, but it would be kind of fun, right?
Definitely.
3A plus is still great. I love 3A plus.
I've got a little robot behind me that if there was a 4A model out there, I would put it in there and it would have the best bring.
Okay, well that's worth knowing. I mean, it is a nice. I do love it. It is a lovely form factor. It's a really compelling form factor. Haven't given a lot of thought to how we'd bring PCI Express out on this, but it's tempting.
So I do have one question about the 400. So one of the things that's interesting about this is that really, if you want to use the GPIO, I think you need to use a cable like this. I don't think there's an easy way to use a hat. How did you kind of come to the decision of, or is there a way to use the hat that we haven't figured out yet besides getting a breakout cord?
So yes, you can get a female to male IDC ribbon cable, and then you end up in a situation where the hat sits on. If you have a connector that plugs in the back, and then it kind of comes under and out, and then you have an opposite gender connector, and you can drop the hat into that. Then the hat sits on the ribbon cable behind the Pi, and it's in the right orientation. It's facing you, and so there is a ribbon cable. CPC sell them. Quite a few. We will probably help our resellers. We have a source for them, and we will probably help our resellers sell up. It's like a $1 bit of kit. This was what I envisaged. So I envisaged something which was a bit more like a breakout, kind of a thing with the footprint of an A plus, that you then has 4 screw holes and that sort of arrangement. But I think there's a simpler arrangement which is just made of ribbon cable.
I think it's great that
you do that as well.
I think it's great that you kept it on there because GPIO is where all the fun comes from.
Yeah, I know.
I'm
a software engineer. I would say this. I'm a software engineer. I didn't want to put GPIO on Raspberry Pi. It's Pete Lomas's fault. It's my co-founder. He said, "You got all these pins come out of the out of the chip. You should bring them to a header. Well, I should bring them to a header because he did the design. So, yeah, he did, and I didn't stop him or didn't try. I'm not sure I could have stopped him, but I didn't try to stop him. And of course, most, as you say, is where all the fun is. It's where most of the really creative stuff with the Pi comes from.
So we have time for one more question, and Sensor Equipment asks, do you support multiple NVMe drives on a PCI bus or have any plan to?
So PCIe is a point-to-point link. We have a single PCI. So we have a single PCI link. A thing you can do with a single PCI link is to talk to a PCI controller on another piece of silicon and then talk to some other devices. So you can imagine building a system. We briefly thought about putting a PCI Express switch on Pi 400 because it would let you do both USB, and then you could have put an SSD, a BGA SSD inside the package, but we didn't do it. So no, we don't have plans ourselves, but again, it's something the community will do. So, if it's a thing that people want, CM4 opens the door to the community building that. And you can imagine and we do get good performance out of NVMe, single NVMe devices on the PC, on the CM4 IO board. And you can imagine if you want to build a NAS, then having a couple of PCI Express devices, a couple of NVMe devices would be a good way of doing that.
Yeah. I should mention that our next week's guest is from a company that makes Turing Pi, which is a clustering hardware for Raspberry Pi.
Yeah.
And he will be talking about doing clustering. So I'm sure that will do great with storage.
Those guys they're kind of a poster child for what do things like compute module unlock in the community? There's always been a little bit like the thing with GPIO. The interesting thing about Raspberry Pi hasn't been the things we've thought of. It's been the things that the community's done with it when we put it out there in the wild. And of course, the decisions we make about the mainline product, the SBC product, constrain, as we discovered with people desoldering the USB controller to get the PCI bus, they constrain the sorts of things that the people's imagination can come up with. And that's why products like the compute module, even if the compute module was not a commercially successful product for us, it would probably still be a thing we wanted to do because it is the least constrained member of the Raspberry Pi family. It's the one that has the largest potential for technically literate enthusiasts to experiment with. And Turing Pi is a poster child for exactly that kind of thing. We never would have occurred to us that this was a platform for clustering, and yet now there are 10,000 node clusters out there with Raspberry Pis in them.
Oh, I have to find that. I have to find that and get a picture.
That's a
the organization I'm thinking of will not let you go to their facility and take a picture.
Oh well. We'll try.
But they would tell us about it.
They're out in the desert. You don't want to go there anyway.
Oh, I see. Well, thank you so much, Eben. It was wonderful having you on again. Thanks so much to everyone who watched and asked questions. As always, we do the show at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. British time on Tuesdays, and you can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and wherever audio podcasts are. So we'll see you next week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.